Welcome to the Blue White Breakdown presented by PennLive. It's Monday, it's at noon. Johnny McGonigal here with Max Ralph. And we got some legalese to talk about, Max. We got a settlement, the House versus the NCAA, some classic Friday news dump, some real good work on the news dumping part of this, because it was late on Friday night that this came out, that finally, federal judge approved what we were expecting to be approved at some point here this summer, and it went through. That there is a landmark change in how college athletics is going to operate moving forward, and we're here to talk about it. We're here to talk about how it affects Penn State, and we got a little bit of recruiting to talk about at the end of this podcast, but first and foremost, the news that dominated the weekend and into this week is the change to college sports as we know it. The biggest part of this, Max, of course, is that colleges, universities, athletic departments will be paying athletes directly for the first time in the NCAA's history, and some much more to talk about there as well. But before we dive into all of that, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Johnny. I always love a little, 10 p.m. Friday night news break. It's just, college sports never fails to always hit just at the perfect time with news, whether it's on a national scale or local. We gotta love it. It's this profession we've chosen, and we appreciate it. Absolutely, it was awesome. We got a lot to get into, of course. But yeah, I mean, things going well. So it's been fun. The rain could hold off for you and I and all the fellow golfers out there. It's been a bit of it's been wet for the past few weeks, and it kind of sucks. But we're getting there.
Yeah, I was able to get out last Friday morning and beat the rain. Had an early tee time, so that was good. But have my annual outing with all my really close friends from high school and college this upcoming weekend, Saturday in South Jersey, and it's not looking good. It's hard to plan something out with 20 people, and we planned it months in advance. And so I hope the rain holds off and we're able to get out there. But and then obviously it's a big golf weekend too with the U.S. Open.
That's right.
At Oakmont.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Maybe Thursday's live pod we'll have a pick or two. Keep that in mind, because Bob has asked me on these Monday podcasts before each of the majors for a pick or two that I've got. So we'll save that for maybe Thursday at noon when we'll have a couple of the morning tee times out already. But
yeah, that's right.
But hard to pick against Scotty. Anyway,
it is.
Back to the news of the weekend. Why we're here and actually talking is Penn State and Penn State football specifically, but all of Penn State athletics really, and how they're going to be affected by this settlement, the House versus the NCAA. Like I mentioned, college athletes being paid directly by the universities and athletic departments for the first time. The settlement resolved 3 antitrust cases, establishes a new revenue sharing model that acts as a salary cap. The model is going to be allowing athletic departments to distribute, up to around $20.5 million in NIL revenue to athletes during the 25 and 26 season. As we know previously, athletes were only able to make NIL money through outside parties. It started as, hey, this car company or this, or Gatorade or whoever can pay Nick Singleton whatever they think, and then NIL kind of turned into, with no guardrails or anything, turned into a little bit of pay for play. Not a little bit. It flat out turned into that for a lot of schools that were diving and investing a lot of money with their donors through collectives. And that is seemingly being curbed, or at least pushed towards going away in favor of this revenue sharing model. So Max, first and foremost, just kind of your thoughts on this, and as we dive into what it could mean for Penn State.
I think it's a needed step forward. It's a big change, because if we're going to have pay for play either way, at least let the schools do it legally, and maybe have some regulations behind it. Obviously, there's the addition of the 4 power conferences that had actually filed the suit are now in governance of, third party NIL stuff, which does still exist. That's an important thing to note. The idea is that those car companies, the Gatorades, the actual like sponsorship portion of NIL is still a thing. Like it's still going to be a thing, and that's kind of what it seems like college sports and the powers that be are hoping NIL collectives and any what may have you, whatever you want to call them, are actually operating toward now. There's the new edition of this thing called NIL Go, operated by the College Sports Commission, right, which is run by the 4 power conferences. So there's a lot going on, but like we essentially have legal pay for play now, and we also have this other half of NIL that kind of has the theme of like what it was supposed to be when it started. I think it's a good change, like I said at the top, because if we're going to have pay for play either way, like at least let it be legal. My worry, though, is that, as you kind of alluded to, like there was never any policing over NIL. And the goal with this NIL Go thing is to have a little more policing, but the parameters are very unclear. And to this point, there's no indication of what punishment could be handed down if improper agreements are agreed to for any athletes. Like there's just still a lot up in the air. Like I feel like we fixed half the problem, but there's going to be more problems that are going to exist because the parameters are any agreement, any third party agreement above $600 has to be self-reported by the athletes starting like later this month, I believe, toward NIL Go, and then they'll determine. The word fair market value has been used a lot, but that wasn't exactly what the website said. But essentially, they just want to make sure that it's not pay for play. And yeah, so I think there's just going to be a lot more complications, but I'd call it a step forward, I guess, is kind of my first reaction.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fair market value end of this, when it comes to those third party agreements, it's all like I believe they have Deloitte, who
Mhm.
is going to be determining what is fair market value.
Yeah.
Something that Pat Kraft mentioned, Penn State's athletic director, and just doubling back on him really quick. He released a video last July, calling for fundraising support from Penn State's alumni base and fan base with revenue sharing in mind. So again, it's not like Pat Kraft and Penn State has been prepared for this change in college sports. Everyone has known that this is coming. It's not like this is a surprise by any means that everyone knew that rev share was on its way. But Pat Kraft said in terms of fair market value, that's an advantage for Penn State because fair market value for being a Penn State starting quarterback is pretty dang good. We don't know exactly what that number is or what that could be for a Drew Aller, Ethan Grunkmeyer in the future, perhaps, or insert other quarterback name here. But the fact that these schools like a Penn State brand, an Alabama brand, Michigan, Ohio State, like those players are still going to make out pretty well by being the quarterback or the number one receiver or the top linebacker at Penn State. Like those players, that's in those situations. The fair market value is going to be pretty good, better than it might at another university.
Mhm.
The actual enforcement of this, like you said, it's pretty unclear. It's going to be interesting to see if if there's any punishments that happen in the near future. What does that look like? Is it a player ineligible? Is it a fine to the university or athletic department? Will that actually be enforced? Will it be appealed? Will it be challenged in court? A lot of stuff that we don't know how this is going to ultimately play out. But what we do know is that every athletic department is kind of working with the same salary cap. And it's
Mhm.
not just for football. Like we've talked a lot of football so far. A lot of the allocation of that 20.5 million salary cap, rev share cap, is going to go towards football for a lot of schools. Men's basketball, women's basketball will be kind of next up for most schools. Wrestling for Penn State will be big. You look at Big East schools like a Villanova or a Xavier, like schools that either don't have football or It's a FCS program. Like that's going to be an advantage for them in men's and women's basketball potentially.
Mhm.
But this for Penn State, you're going to see a lot of that 20.5 allocated towards the football program, and understandably so.
Yeah, so when we last heard from Pat Kraft in a public media setting was in late February, and he said then and reiterated in a brief letter this past weekend, Penn State plans to spend all of the $20.5 million that they're getting in year one, and he anticipates it's going to go to football for the large majority, but then men's basketball, women's basketball, and wrestling at Penn State. The caveat that he kind of put with it though was like, we need to be in a position where we can help every sport as needed. Like Penn State is among the leaders in the country with 31 varsity sports. I always forget if it's 31 or 33. Pretty sure it's 31. It's messy if you count rugby or not. But anyway, a lot of sports and has been really successful in a lot of them. I mean, if you look at what hockey did this past year, or women's volleyball won a national championship. And basically, Pat Kraft was like, if the number one fencer in the world is out there and we want to go get the number one fencer, we need to be in a position that we're able to do that. So the 20.5 is not all going to football. Like that's an important distinction to make, even though most of it's going there. Another thing I wanted to mention is that it looks as though that salary cap will increase each year from now. By about 4%, I think is what it was. So it's like technically the 20.5 is just a projection because it's 22.5% of total rev share. So like there's a lot of numbers, but it's essentially $20.5 million that, schools are able to pay out. And it's going to be interesting. And it kind of gets into, Johnny, another layer of this with scholarships that have now taken a little bit of a different turn. As roster limits change and everything.
Yeah, when it comes to the other end of this is basically the settlement is implementing new roster limits, which
Mm-hmm.
will replace the sport by sport scholarship limits,
Mm-hmm.
and each sport will kind of have its own maximum roster size while allowing for every roster spot to receive a scholarship. And schools are going to allocate those scholarship funds, kind of as they see fit. With football, we'll start there and then address the rest.
Yeah,
With football, I believe the roster size limit previously was 120,
correct. Yeah.
and there was an 85 scholarship limit for football.
Mm-hmm.
That roster size now, it's just 105. And moving forward, it's 105. So it's not like Penn State has to make roster cuts now because I believe they're at 126 on their current roster. So
Yeah.
it's not like they have to make sweeping roster cuts now because something that a lot of coaches and certainly players were interested in it as well was when this settlement went into effect that the players currently on rosters being grandfathered in here and not being affected by the 105 immediately. So Penn State will be fine in that regard. Because James Franklin has spoken out against the roster limits, though, as they are. Because going from a 120 to a 105, basically you cut out 15 potential walk-ons, in that equation, and we've seen over the years, how walk-ons have developed into useful members of not just Penn State's football program, but across the country, and just that part of the college football ecosystem, and so a part of that will go by the wayside, which is unfortunate. But the 105 roster limit that Penn State will have, they're going to be able to have 105 players on scholarship. And so that's a positive. And Pat Kraft has mentioned it in the past that he sees that as a positive. And you have to imagine that every player on Penn State's football roster will be on scholarship, or at least that's how they will likely approach it. And I guess anything I missed there, Max, I feel like I hit it on the head. But
No, I think you covered it. It's a tricky situation though, because the actual date that rosters are going to be at 105 is going to be a few years in the future, because basically this 105 limit was discussed and kind of agreed to last summer, or maybe last fall, I guess, in October. And there was some expected issues around the country where a lot of coaches, and not just in football, this exists for every sport now. Some had cuts, some got increases, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But coaches across the country were kind of like, "Hey, we have to make cuts soon, even though it's the middle of the season. Like, get out of town, basically, or like you're not going to have a spot soon." So this winter and this spring's transfer portal might have been a little bit crazy for some of those players on the margins. And we went into April with the expectation that Judge Claudia Wilkin, who was presiding over the case, was probably going to make an approval on April 7th at the final hearing. Well, we got there. A lot of people objected to the agreement, and most of them specifically on the side of rosters, in the hearing. And Wilkin basically said, like, yeah, I'm not approving this until we get some clarity on the rosters. So 2 months later, we have an agreement, and it includes, like you said, a grandfathered in clause where the term they've used is designated student athletes for players who were on a 2024-25 roster or were recruited and signed at this point for the 2025-26 season with the promise of a roster spot. So basically, we're looking at last year's freshmen and this year's incoming freshmen, walk-on scholarship player regardless. They are guaranteed a spot on their previous team or a new team if they've already gone into the portal through the end of their eligibility. So when you look at the 2025 roster with the 26 or 27 freshmen that Penn State is bringing in on the football side, excuse me, you have 5 years until all of those guys are going to be gone, because some of them are going to redshirt. Some of them are going to, some of them will leave early, whatever. But basically, right now, you're looking at basically an extra 25 to 30 players for football rosters between now and 2030, probably for 5 years before we actually get to the 105. So right now, it's more like a 130-ish roster limit. It's a little weird. But, someday in the future, assuming there's not another change between now and then in college football, which we certainly can't rule out, but the rosters aren't going to be that much smaller in the near future, which obviously is something that I think most coaches are going to be happy about. It's a good thing for a lot of the players that are on Penn State's roster. I look back through it. 3 walk-ons from Penn State's football roster entered the portal over this past offseason. Beckham D., Feisayo Oluleye, who is a Bishop McDevitt grad and local to PennLive, and Jason Estrella, one of the wide receivers. So those 3 guys entered. Only D so far has found a new home. He signed with Lafayette College. So in theory, those guys could come back to Penn State and have a roster spot. Knowing James Franklin and all the public comments he's made, wouldn't rule that out. But it's still different. We don't have walk-ons in the future. Like, the Dom DeLucas of the world are not going to exist anymore. While the rosters aren't going to shrink right away for the next few years, the Dom DeLucas are gone. And before I get into explaining kind of how the scholarship stuff works around, other sports, Johnny, anything to add on that front?
I was just going to say, we went from trying to track the COVID years with a lot of these, players and athletes,
Yeah.
and being confused on, okay, what do we call this guy? Is he a redshirt sophomore? Is he a redshirt junior? I mean, he's been on campus for 5 years. He had an injury. Like, it was so difficult to track all
Yep.
that. And now it's like, all right, we've got, in terms of just making our jobs harder. And now we've got, trying to figure out, okay, how many scholarships does it, like, how many players are going to be able to be on James Franklin's team in 2028? It's really hard to know. It is really hard to know. So bear with us as we try to navigate this and just covering it. But yeah, like, jokes aside, it is good news for, first and foremost, like, the players, the walk-ons that are on this team currently,
Mm-hmm.
because James Franklin talked to us and he said, like, we had conversations with these players, in the winter, in the spring, when none of this was settled yet, and said, we don't know what's going to happen. So it might be a case where this ruling, this settlement comes down and is approved, and we have to let you go. That was a reality. That was a possibility. And so that's why I think you saw, and not just at Penn State, but across the country, and not just in football, but in other sports as well, so many student athletes ended up entering the transfer portal basically with the thought or fear in their head that, I'm not going to have a roster spot at Wisconsin. I'm not, this might not be, a thing for me. And so I do think it's a positive for them that, they're not getting kicked out the door, that they get to have this experience of not just playing their sport at their school, but also, to get an education, et cetera, et cetera. But just something to keep in mind as we move forward beyond this season, beyond next season, and into the future for college sports.
Yeah, as far as the eligibility goes, the one that kind of blew my mind a little bit the other day, last Thursday. We were talking about Zariah Fisher with James Franklin, and Tyler Donahue of Lions 247 asked a question and kind of ended it like, what can Zariah do to cap off his career well? Guy who's been hurt, like you said, Johnny. And James looks at him and he goes, I'm pretty sure he has 2 years left. It's like,
which Zariah Fisher is now entering, I believe, his sixth season.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Penn State. Yeah. Yep. Now he's had 2 seasons, 2 years lost to injury.
Right.
So that's part of that equation. But yeah, talk about some roster construction headaches. Are more of them are on the way for us.
They are. But yeah, to wrap up the scholarship kind of portion of this, which is secondary to the money, but still a big piece. For example, wrestling, obviously huge at Penn State. It used to have 9.9 scholarships. Now it has a roster limit of 30. So it's different from football where the rosters are getting smaller with an increase in scholarships. This is like a huge increase in scholarships that's changed things a lot. Penn State has the number one wrestling program in the country, has for a long time, but still not necessarily expecting 30 scholarships on that roster. It's an interesting spot. And Pat Kraft said it in February. He was like, I'd be shocked if there's a school across the country that has 30 scholarships in wrestling. But like, if we have to do it, maybe they'd figure it out. But yeah, so that's the key with all this. The roster limits are everybody is allowed to have a scholarship. It's then at the school's discretion to provide that or not, or it doesn't have to be a full scholarship. It can be partial, which again brings us all back to the fact that this is truly just pay for play. Like this is basically a professional atmosphere where, Drew Aller's making, this is not actual, I'm just throwing a number out, but making $5 million in a year, and the second string wrestler on, at 135 is getting like $100,000, it's interesting. It's a big change. I'm curious to see how Penn State maneuvers through it with the help of the collective Happy Valley United and everything, because again, like we said earlier, there's going to be more governance over that, but it's still kind of up in the air what it looks like, and there will still be money coming from that way. So there's a lot of changes, mostly good. I think that, we still need some legal action from Congress to actually codify most of this stuff and make sure that it doesn't change again in the next year or so, and help put down some actual guidelines and enforcement around it. But like I said at the top, I think it's at least a good start and a step in the right direction.
Yeah, Max, we have this. We had, the changes impending or possible changes to the CFP. Yep. We already have the straight seeding model in place for the 2025 season in the 12-team format. And looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, it's looking like it's going to get to 16 teams. Mm-hmm. And what that looks like, is that a 5-11 model where you have the 5 highest ranked conference champions along with 11 at large? Are there going to be automatic qualifiers for specific conferences and more for the Big Ten and SEC than the ACC and Big 12? So we have that, those plates spinning. The CFP, we finally get a settlement here in-house versus the NCAA. And so there's quite a bit that's going on right now in college sports. And, in case we missed something, I feel like we laid it out pretty well with the House settlement. But, on Saturday morning, I posted kind of an explainer of what this means, for Penn State. And then you followed up with a really solid in-depth look at just the roster limits and the scholarship end of this. So both of those are on PennLive.com. If you have another question or if we somehow skipped over something, go read those two because that'll give you a good sense as well as to what's going on and how this is looking for Penn State. Max, you're raising your hand. What's up?
I was just saying, you can also join us live on Thursday and chat at us, and we can answer some questions there too.
Yes. If you wanna try to melt our brains with some live questions on House versus NCAA, no,
we are not lawyers.
We're not lawyers at all. We decided to go into sports journalism and not law school. But no, yeah, we will be back Thursday at noon with a live podcast. And I'm sure we'll be talking a lot of recruiting ahead of another official visit for Penn State. And then they had a big one over this past weekend. They got a commit last Friday, Max.
That's right.
I'll throw it to you in a second to talk a little bit more about him. But we'll be talking some recruiting on Thursday during our live show. But please feel free, jump in, ask some questions, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But Penn State added to its 2026 recruiting class, Max. What'd they get?
Yep. 3-star cornerback Amari Polidor from St. Francis in Baltimore. It's a good get. Like, he's not super highly rated right now, but he's a guy who's had some success camping over the last summer and obviously more to come this summer. The couple of interesting things with this, James Franklin has never signed a recruit from St. Francis. Which the number one player in 2026 is at St. Francis as well right now, Zion Ali, who is committed to Maryland and, has shut down that recruitment. I have no info, but I'm just saying Chop Robinson comes to mind when I think of Zion Ali. But St. Francis is a school that always has talent over in Baltimore, and it's in the region, it's in the footprint for Penn State, obviously. Franklin has done very well in Maryland over his Penn State career. So it's a little shocking to have not gotten a player from St. Francis in his Penn State tenure, but they've got one now, kind of a toolsy corner who's, under overlooked at the moment, but certainly could rise. And, the second part of this, in my opinion, is this is a really heavy class in the secondary. They've got 3 cornerbacks committed already and 2 safeties. But, as we've kind of alluded to before, Johnny, that's a position where you really can't have too many guys in a recruiting class because Terry Smith and Anthony Poindexter always find a way to get some of those guys in on special teams, and especially with the way that the redshirt rule is now, where you can play in 4 games and then into the playoffs as well. You can divvy up those guys' playing time and get, 4 in the beginning, 4 in the middle, 4 at the end, however you want to use it. A lot of corners and safeties in the class is not a bad thing. And that also means that, eyes are still out there for the big ones, Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams, who you've had some good work on Joey lately. Go check that out on PennLive if you haven't as well. It's an interesting addition. Class that's tracking to be in the top 5 right now, which would be the biggest since 2022. So this is a really interesting one.
Yeah, Penn State's still very much in on Joey O'Brien, the number 1 player from Pennsylvania, safety out of LaSalle College High School outside the Philly area here. He's going to be making his commitment decision on June 20th. So in a couple weeks now, choosing between Penn State, Oregon, Clemson, and Notre Dame. And I almost forgot that last one. You cannot forget Notre Dame when it comes to Joey O'Brien. No. Same deal with Grayson McKeo, by the way, 4-star offensive tackle from LaSalle, considering Penn State, Notre Dame, and Texas. Those 2 players, I was able to speak to LaSalle's head coach, Brett Gordon, to dive into their recruitment a little bit more and how Penn State has approached recruiting those 2 players, 2 of the best players in Pennsylvania. Stories posted on those on PennLive from last week. But like you mentioned, Joey O'Brien, Kari Adams, a 4-star corner from Maryland, as well as Dorian Barney, the 4-star corner from Georgia. Those three guys are still at the top of Penn State's board when it comes to the secondary, but they've already gotten a lot of guys in. And just one more note on Omari Polidor, and he's a 3-star guy, but like you mentioned, really toolsy. He's transferring into St. Francis, so he's going to be playing, at a top program for his senior season. Just a kind of a big picture thought on kind of recruiting now these days when it comes to NIL, and I know that things are changing with the rev share, but when it comes to recruiting high school and a lot of money and resources being committed to these high school athletes as well, and you get into sometimes bidding wars with other schools because that is part of the equation. It's a smart strategy for James Franklin and co. to not only go after the big fish, but also try to identify those 3-star guys who you can develop, who have tools that also might not land you in a massive bidding war. Like the 5-star guys will, the 3-star guys probably not. And Penn State has a pretty good track record too of taking a look at some of those under the radar players, bringing them in and developing them into studs. Look at Venga Ioane, who I'll be writing about later this week. Not many people wanted him, as a 3-star offensive lineman from the Pacific Northwest, and he could be a first-round pick this upcoming draft in 2026. So, that's just one example. But yeah, Penn State doing some really good work on the 2026 recruiting trail. Still more news to follow in the coming days and weeks on some of those big fish. But we'll have all that covered for you, at least until I leave for my PTO on June 18th. So you'll have Joey O'Brien's commitment covered.
That's right.
On June 20th.
That's right. We'll get Bob's take on it as well, of course, when we're podcasting, and it'll be all good. It's going to be a busy summer, has been already, but recruiting doesn't stop, as we all know well. So appreciate you tuning in. Like we said, if you have any more questions that we can try and answer about the house settlement or recruiting for that matter, we go live every Thursday at noon. Join with us. Go read everything you can on PennLive.com. Johnny and I have put a lot up there in the past week from recruiting and the settlement, and there's more coming as well. Still from that Coaches Avail we had last week. So appreciate you all tuning in, and take care.